Welcome to Moments That Matter, a podcast that looks at the moments in our lives that come along from time to time that have consequences long after the moment, especially those moments that have to do with the choice of vocation. In his book, Let Your Life Speak, Listening for the Voice of Vocation, Parker Palmer speaks of a clearness committee in the Quaker tradition, wherein a group of older, wiser people ask questions of someone considering a life choice, as a way of clarifying the next step. We may not meet with a committee about these big decisions, but we all have these critical junctures in our lives which we can think of as clearness committee moments. We need to pay attention to these moments because they are profound and potentially life-altering. We will relay stories from our lives and interview others about theirs, especially noting the clearness committee moments, those we chose to recognize and those that were sadly ignored, those decisions that were made with God in mind and those that were not. Our hope is that these podcasts will cause you to think of the same kind of moments in your life with new clarity. Today we have the rare privilege of talking to Amy Manning, a money guru who has served as a financial advisor with DHG for the past 12 years. She graduated with a degree in finance in 2008 and subsequently became a certified financial planner. As a financial advisor, she has counseled countless individuals on achieving their financial dreams. Amy is married and lives in Concord with her filmmaking husband and truly incredibly precious daughter. What's more, she is my one and only sister, proof that financial wisdom struck only one in our family. Amy, welcome to Moments That Matter.
Hi, thank you for having me today.
Well, listen, let's jump right in. Talk us through what just happened economically in a matter of a few weeks in light of our current coronavirus.
Yes, so it has certainly been a wild ride over the last month or so. And I think it all started really at the end of February. I think people started realizing that this wasn't just China, that this was going all over the world and specifically here in the States. And so that was kind of how things started going in March. And I feel like most people probably heard somewhere in the news about the market just crashing in the month of March. And so we did see the largest drop in the S&P 500 is always one of the measures of U.S. markets that I use, and it was down 34% in a single month, which is fast. Market drops are not uncommon. That has certainly happened before. I think what surprised everyone was the speed at which it happened. Normally, something like that would take several months or even a few years to drop by that much, but people were just kind of paralyzed in fear, I think, when that started. And then, obviously, as we went into April, now about 95% of the country is under a stay-at-home order, and businesses have been forced to close. So they've had to start laying people off. You've probably heard a lot about furloughs in the news. People are receiving pay cuts because the economy has virtually come to a grinding halt. And the last week we got pretty discouraging numbers that now 22 million people have filed for unemployment. And again, all this happened literally over about 6 weeks. So yeah, kind of scary.
Yeah, it's truly. And at this breakneck speed, are you recognizing that investors are falling apart, or is there maybe some calm serenity behind the curtain?
Look, I don't care how strong you are mentally. I don't know that anyone's feeling a calm serenity right now. I will say that there is a lot of panic. In fact, panic selling is really what caused the drop so quickly. And you hear all about it in the financial media, which makes things even worse because people get all stirred up and they're like, oh my gosh, this person's selling. Maybe I should sell. Maybe this is it. Maybe this really is the market going to zero, and so you've got people caught up in this cycle of panic. And so some people are certainly doing that. But on the flip side, there are a lot of disciplined investors saying this is an opportunity. And, we believe that the fundamentals are still good about the economy and the way markets work and that business will recover. And so if I could buy something at a 30% discount right now, why wouldn't I? And so for people who have cash that they've been planning on investing or, just thinking about becoming an investor right now, it's certainly a great time. We've seen markets set back to really where they were 4 years ago. So it's kind of like going back in time and being able to buy at those prices. And, frankly, as an advisor, if we're doing our job, then right now is when we're going in and we're rebalancing. And so, people ask, well, what are you doing right now? Like, if you're not selling, what are you doing? And so really what we're doing is, if someone's invested, like, let's just say 60% in the stock market and they got 40% of their account in like bonds or something safe. Well, those percentages change when you've got a market crash like this. And so we're going in and we're selling a little bit from what's either performed well or hasn't lost value, and we're buying more of what has lost value. And so that's literally how you buy low and sell high, is by doing that. So that's what I've been spending a lot of my time on. But again, a lot of people are nervous, but I think most people believe this is going to recover. Maybe not as quickly as we all thought at first, but people are still believing that, a year from now, we're not going to be scrambling to buy toilet paper. Hopefully, this is all in the past by then.
Yeah, let us hope. At the beginning, people were using the term recession. We're entering a recession. Then it started, people were using the term depression, and it was kind of hearkening back to the Great Depression. What do you see as the differences between sort of these terms and even housing market crash of 2008 and certainly the Great Depression back in the early 1900s?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there are some big differences. And, to be honest, the media is not our friend. And I think we all know that, but especially the financial media, they really love to stir up that panic. And, they want to throw around Great Depression as often as they can and get people all riled up. So anyway, as far as a recession, so in a typical recession, you're going to see the market fall on average by about 35%. And that's just looking back over history if we're taking an average. We've already seen that in this circumstance. So you can kind of say, have we hit the bottom? It's very possible. No one's going to know until we get through all this, and hindsight's 2020. But it is very possible we've already seen the market go as low as it will go. The big difference between the most recent recession, which, as you mentioned, was the housing bubble of 2008, you saw the market fall 52%. So a lot worse. But that also happened over the course of about a year and a half. So, a lot of pain, little time, little pain, a lot of time. The big difference there is that unemployment is actually twice already now what it was in 08 and 09. And again, that makes sense because of the nature of what's happened. Everything's just come to a grinding halt rather than a gradual slowdown and progression towards a recession, and really no time to prepare. So then you go to the Great Depression and you look at what's the difference there. So the world was very different 100 years ago, and there was a very limited understanding of economics back in the 1930s. In fact, the Federal Reserve, they'll use interest rates as a tool to, boost the economy or whatnot. And so they actually raised rates too quickly after the Great Depression, and the country went into another depression. And so we just know so much more now than they did back then. Now economics is a field of study. People major in that. People have, careers as economists, and also think about the data. Back then there were no computers, and now data is collected and presented to the public so much more accuracy and efficiency than it was back then. So if you listen to most people that have some sense in the news, most people, I think the general consensus is that we're not headed for a depression for sure. So
well,
again, no one can ever say for sure, but
That's good to know. So you mentioned earlier that you've been doing a lot of this work talking with investors and allaying their concerns. What is your counsel to those who are concerned over their 401ks, or those who are hoping to retire soon, or those who just have investments?
Again, I've been spending a lot of my time talking to clients, and we joke that, we talk people off the ledge. We remind them of just the basics of investing. We calm their fears. Sometimes we feel like psychiatrists instead of advisors. And, I think reminding people of the fundamentals, coming into this, we had a very strong economy. The financial system was very strong. And so that was not the case in 2008 and maybe some previous situations. And so totally different circumstances right now. Again, no one knows for sure how quickly the recovery will happen, but most agree that it will happen. when people are scared, you look at the news, you look at the markets, and that translates to you losing money if you're an investor. And so that starts fear, and fear leads to panic, and panic leads to irrational behavior. And so really, I think as an advisor, we're coming in to try to prevent that irrational behavior and remind people of some of the basics, which are, look, if you're seeing a loss right now in your investment, it's just a loss on paper. It's not a true loss until you actually sell those investments and take the loss. If you believe things are going to recover, you're so much better to ride it out than to try to do something to save yourself short term. Studies have shown that people end up shooting themselves in the foot more often than not when they try to prevent the loss as opposed to just riding it through and recovering. I always have my little examples and anecdotes that I use, to help resonate with people. And, you think being an investor is like being on a roller coaster, right? You've got the ups and downs and the drops and the dips. But what's the number one rule if you're riding a roller coaster? You don't get off in the middle of the ride. And so that's a perfect example of what's going on right now, that you don't want to hurt yourself by taking an action that's irresponsible. And so, another good example is think about owning your house. I mean, if you're in your house, you bought your house, you like your house, you have no intentions of moving, you don't want to sell, and your house is worth $250,000, but someone comes along and says, hey, I'll give you $150,000 for your house, and you don't want to move and you don't need to move, then why would you take that deal? That's a bad deal. And so, especially if you're going to buy it back a year later at what it's worth. So that's, sometimes people don't think about investments that way, but really you're an owner. You're an owner in these companies. And so, so if you believe in that, then why are you going to jeopardize yourself over the short term if they're going to be okay? So.
Yeah, that's great. I think people on an individual level and in maybe varying degrees are feeling the squeeze right now. And we're hearing a lot about the government providing some stimulus packages. What assistance is the government providing right now?
So they're doing a lot. I know that some people might not feel like they're feeling it yet, but I've read a lot of articles that's called the government's response, at least financially, like a nuclear bomb of assistance. And so you've heard the numbers in the trillions with a T, not billions with a B. And so they came out pretty early on with just enhanced unemployment benefits, beefing up food stamps, emergency food assistance, stuff like that. That was really early on stuff they did kind of right out of the gate. And then the big one that we've all heard about is the $2 trillion CARES Act, which that was really passed to help small businesses as well as individual families. So when you've heard the stimulus checks, and some people have already got theirs, that was part of the CARES Act. So for individuals, you would, as long as you don't exceed the income limits, you'd get $1,200 a person, $500 for each kid that you have. They've beefed up unemployment benefits. You can now get an extra $600 a week over and above what the state already provides, which is pretty big. They've said that if you really are in dire straits and you need to touch your retirement accounts, you can now take up to $100,000 out of that without penalty. So that's a big deal. I think we all probably heard that, they extended the tax filing deadline until July 15th. So people who owed taxes or needed to file, they now have an extra 3 months. And then for small businesses, they came out with the $350 billion Paycheck Protection Program and economic disaster loans for small businesses. So that's supposed to help keep people on the payroll until this is all over. And then lastly, just the Fed. You've probably seen actions that the Fed has taken. They cut interest rates to almost zero, and they did that really fast. That was a huge deal. They're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to get access, for banks and families to get access to money. So they're really, really doing a lot.
Could I ask you a question about 2008? Because I find it fascinating that you started working as a financial advisor in 2008. I have to ask you what that experience was like.
Yeah, so I actually started on September 15th, 2008, and I've actually forgotten the numbers, but that was one of the worst market days. And I think it was when Lehman Brothers or Bear Stearns went under was that day. And to be honest with you, I mean, I came to this job straight out of college, and so I was kind of wide-eyed and ignorant of really what I was walking into. I mean, it was crazy, but I also had nothing to compare it to. And so I was also in a different role at the time, and that, obviously on my first day of work, I had no clients. So it was, a little different for me then than it is now. And, but it was definitely a crazy time. And I think the benefit I got, though, of starting during that time was really seeing how we worked with our clients and how we were able to keep them sane and safe and keep them in their seats, and how they really did recover. And, a lot of times people will say, oh gosh, if I'm retiring in a few years, I don't have the time to withstand another crash. And I got to tell them, well, actually, we did see things recover in just a couple of years, in the markets at least. And so having that experience was really good for me, I think, to be able to speak to things now. And also, just once you go through something once, not to say it's easier, but at least you kind of know what you've gotten yourself into, So, I mean, look, all of us are probably going to live through another handful of recessions in our lifetime. It's just the reality. So, whether they're caused by a virus or something else.
Mm. Was there any talk of how a pandemic would affect the economy, like in your circles before this?
Certainly not in mine. I have to imagine that the powers that be and, the government and the Fed and everything had thought about that, but that's not something that's been a topic of conversation for us, really.
Are you surprised?
I guess so. I don't know. At least for me, it's not something I ever thought of or considered. But again, I mean, I think about the way the market reacts to things like this is nothing new. This is just another, I hate to say business as usual, but this is just part of being an investor. I mean, if there were no risk in the markets, then you couldn't make money in them. And so while the cause of a market crash might be very different, and we could debate whether right or wrong or should this have ever happened, at least from my job and what I deal with on a day-to-day basis, market crash is market crash. And if you look back over history, we've always recovered.
I'm thinking about, the government sort of reaching out to individuals and providing some relief, but I've heard 80% of businesses in America are small businesses. If I'm a small business owner, what hope do I have of receiving assistance from the government? And is there anything that maybe the government didn't take into consideration providing relief to these small businesses that are so acutely affected?
Yeah, so we're right in the middle of all of that right now. I mean, the government did provide those loans, some of which would be forgiven to small businesses. But when they opened the Paycheck Protection Program just a couple weeks ago, it was completely flooded with applications that could not be processed fast enough. And they ran out of the money in only 2 weeks, which was last Thursday. They announced that the money was gone. So it's really bad for small businesses right now. And, when you think about a small business that might just have a few owners, few employees, I mean, they don't have a lot of cash reserves. They don't have a big line of credit they can draw down on. I mean, it's not uncommon to hear that business owners are dipping into their own pockets to, their personal savings to make payroll. And so anyway, we did reach the cap on those loans 2 weeks ago. They are debating an additional $300 billion, which, unless it's happened in the last couple hours, I haven't heard of anything, but they are supposed to announce something either today or this week that there's more money there. But after it all shook out, so they did issue 1.4 million loans, but there are 30 million small businesses in America. So obviously only a fraction of them got a loan approved. And even just personally, I mean, I've seen a lot of stuff out on social media friends of mine that are small business owners that are like, look, I could never even get through to anybody. I could never even get my application processed. And so, if you didn't already have a good relationship with a bank, banks were pretty much only lending to their existing customers. And so if you didn't have that, you were kind of out of luck. And so I did read something last week that said 75% of small and medium-sized businesses in America that have been forced to shut down need an infusion of cash of at least $50,000 by the 1st of May to get off the ground. So some of these will close and they won't survive. Some obviously will, but it's very sad. It's very sad. Like you said, small business, that's the backbone of America, really.
Wow, that's incredible. We too have friends who have said the same down here in South Carolina that we know. For people that maybe are not small business owners, but just the average citizen, what are some practical things that you would advise a struggling American to employ? What are just some practical things they could do if they find themselves short on resources during this time?
Yeah. So, we probably already know people that have had some pay cuts or been furloughed. So if that has happened, you can apply for unemployment, or if you've been furloughed, so you are eligible for unemployment. So that's important to know. And also if you've been laid off, but with a furlough, you're typically only going to be out of work, hopefully temporarily, but you are still eligible for unemployment. The government is offering an additional $600 per week for 4 months. So, the average state unemployment benefits probably like $350, $400 a week. So with all that, you're looking at almost $4,000 a month you could be receiving in unemployment, which frankly isn't bad. If you're looking for your stimulus check, but you haven't gotten it yet, you can go on the IRS Get My Payment app. You can see where it is. You can provide updated direct deposit information if you haven't gotten that yet. If you have a mortgage, call your lender. A lot of lenders are doing forbearance and letting you put off your payment for a few months. As part of the stimulus, they did suspend student loan payments and interest until September 30th. You can refinance your mortgage because mortgage rates have dropped and maybe reduce your monthly payment. And then I always tell people to have a doomsday budget for times like this. Like, know how much it costs you to live, but then understand, okay, if, stuff hits the fan, like cutting this, like here's my bare bones, what it costs me to live. And then, worst case scenario, you can tap into your retirement accounts penalty free, like we talked about. You can take a loan from your 401k. That's a source of money. So there's just a few things you can do.
Tell us, because we haven't really asked this, just about your background, and because we ask everybody who we interview, don't be too scared. Just kind of growing up, and especially with Scott being so annoying, and how you got interested in finance and how that's evolved, like during the course of your career.
Sure. So growing up, I was always the math nerd. I loved numbers. I was good at math, more so than other subjects, but never thought I would pursue a career in it. And got to college and was thinking I would just do like a general business major. And then I got to this corporate finance class, which was, the reputation was this, oh my gosh, this is the hardest class you'll ever take. Everyone fails the first exam. Get ready. You're gonna not do well in this class. And so I took the first exam and I got 100 on it. And so my professor asked me to stay after class, and he said, hey, this is clearly a strength for you. Have you ever thought about going into finance? And honestly, it was that day I think I changed my major. And to be honest, I didn't even know fully what that meant at the time. But as I got into it, I realized that I really enjoyed the personal side of finance as opposed to the corporate side, and that I wanted to work with individuals and families and helping them understand what's, typically a complex topic, and kind of making it relevant for them and achieving their goals, what they want to accomplish in life, helping them do that with their finances.
And can I ask what your major was before you changed it?
So it was just like general business. And then I was also I had a double major actually. It was going to be business and government. I thought I might want to go into politics, which is frankly laughable. And I really did not like those classes. And so I was going to drop that anyway and just go general business. But then knowing that I had a bit of an affinity for numbers, I went the finance route.
And just so you know, in interviewing folks, including myself, by the way, we have discovered that in these kind of moments that matter, right? These clearness committee decisions. A lot of times it is a professor, or a teacher or whatever, and I tell my teacher candidates, all anybody needs is one good idea. And sometimes that's all it is. And you just kind of either change your direction or you're affirmed in your direction, whatever it is, So do you see kind of that you are on the same trajectory, if I could put it that way, however many years later after this decision, you're just kind of continuing on that path?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like once I make a decision, I'm pretty loyal, and especially getting older too. Back in college, you're just trying to figure out what you're supposed to do with your life, and but once I made that decision, and then especially once I got into the career, I realized, wow, not only am I hope I'm good at this, but I really enjoy it. And so yeah, a career change for me would certainly not be on the table, because I do feel like it was just it was divine intervention at the time, really, I think, just pointing me in what I was supposed to do with my life.
So where do you see us? You've spoken several times about recovery, and that's what everybody likes to hear and hope for right now. Where do you see our country moving forward? How does recovery happen? I know in the past you've said that the market sort of precedes big shifts that maybe we would see as more visual and apparent. Where do you see, or how do you see recovery happening?
Yeah, that's a good question. No one knows exactly when a recovery is going to be. I mean, no one can even predict it right now, because as of the time of us recording this, we're all still on lockdown. Everybody's still working from home. Some people are totally out of work. So I think the questions to answer are, when is the stay-at-home order going to be lifted? When can people actually get back to work? And how long does it take the wheels to start turning again? I think it'll be a little bit of a slow start. Projects that were canceled, meetings and conferences that were canceled, when are those going to be rescheduled? And then just think about yourself personally, like, when are you going to feel more comfortable to travel again? When would you go to a concert again? And I think it's going to take a little bit of time for people to feel that level of comfort, and really no one can answer those questions yet. I do think that the government, you can debate whether they're doing enough, but I think financially, I think they're doing as much as they possibly can. Again, we talked about there's just not unlimited money available. So right now we just need to get things moving again. And I think from a market perspective, yes, the market typically precedes the economy, which is why you saw the market tank probably before the first person even filed for unemployment. So yeah, time will tell. And again, the market's already moved up. Gosh, we're up probably 25% from the low. So is this it? But who knows? We could go back down again. I think I heard someone say in a webcast I was watching last week that markets are resilient because companies are resilient, and companies are resilient because people are resilient. And so I think we're seeing a lot of people come together over this. And I think most are going to be really fired up and motivated to get business as usual restored as quickly as possible once we have the green light to do so.
I think this is not well understood. You talked about the markets being ahead of, whatever's happening actually, in the economy. How far ahead? I've heard like 3 to 6 months, something like that.
Yeah, I guess it's not a perfect science, because if it was, then we'd all be able to predict the future. And then, again, there's no risk. But I remember that it was in 2009. So in March of 2009, I believe, is when we hit the low, and then things started to recover. And we were still hearing, though, for years. I mean, it took years for the rest of the economy to get back to where it was. And so, so anyway, yeah, I don't know that I can totally answer that question, but it is on average, going to proceed to some degree.
What do you see, or have you heard anything, at least from the circles that you run around in, that people are finding more innovative ways to work at home? And do you think that would change the course of business going forward? I know Mark Cuban, I was reading an article from Mark Cuban the other day, and he was saying that this is sort of a divine reset moment for businesses, that they're going to learn how to do business in sort of a new era. Do you think people will start working from home a lot more, or being a lot more creative in response to what's happened?
Oh, for sure. And I think we were already trending in that direction anyway, but this has really accelerated it. Then if this pandemic had not happened, I mean, I'm seeing online workout classes, and obviously online shopping has been around for a while, but the grocery delivery services are skyrocketing. Zoom, everyone's using Zoom these days. And to be honest, it kind of makes, we all have this work identity, especially in the corporate world, because we're all dressed up and we're all buttoned up and super professional. But I feel like having these meetings at home makes people more like real people and relatable, especially when you're working with your leaders and your bosses and whatnot. And it's kind of like we're all just real people in the middle of this. But no, as a company, I mean, why pay all this rent for expensive office space if part of your employees can do what they do effectively from home? Not everyone can do that, but some can. And so I think it will change the way people plan and the workspaces they create. Now, what is a bit funny is that, the collaborative workspace is becoming a thing, and they want everybody kind of out in this bullpen and all together. And, right now it'll be hard to say 6 feet apart when we all get back to work in those spaces. But yeah, I think it's definitely challenging the status quo, which is not a bad thing.
Yeah, and I think it will certainly tap into the ingenuity of humanity as they chart their course going forward. Well, this has been great. If you could look in your financial crystal ball and see what's coming down the pipeline. You've hinted at a few things, and some things obviously we can't know. But what do you see in your crystal ball?
Well, unfortunately, my crystal ball has been out of order since 2008. But I've heard some people say that we're going to see a recovery in the second half of the year. They're probably being very optimistic. I've heard an economist say that it'll take 6 quarters, so a year and a half, until we're back to where we were just in the economy in general. We've already talked about markets typically recovering faster than the economy, so investors might have recouped some of their losses over the shorter term as opposed to years from now. But then, you have to think about individual families and those businesses, like which businesses will survive, we don't know yet. Will the stimulus checks be enough to keep families afloat? Maybe for a month or so. Hopefully unemployment, will definitely help if people can just kind of get through the next few months, get back to work. So hopefully it's sooner rather than later. I think we all feel that way.
You sound very much like my financial advisor, because, there's always this kind of buoyant optimism. and that's really important because, for me, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't care about money. I've never cared about money. It doesn't do a thing for me. So I have investments because I have to have investments. That's the only reason I have them. And my financial advisor will call me when these things happen because it's same thing, 2008, same thing. And, you okay? Everything. And I'm like, yeah, it's fine. The only thing, and tell me your thoughts on this. And this is, I know we're in a completely different situation, but since you kind of cut your teeth on 2008, in 2007, okay, we were living in Ukraine. We were missionaries, and my son was graduating from high school. Okay, and I had a pretty good idea what we would need in cash to be able to pay for his tuition for 4 years. Okay, and So we had heard over there, and maybe this is something you can comment on, Europe was really very concerned about the U.S. at that point in 2007. Okay. And they were already talking about a crash and it's coming, blah, blah, blah. So we sat with our financial advisor and said, okay, this is what we know we're going to need for the next 4 years. We feel like, it's like the thing you don't want to do, but at the same time, it's why you have investments, and so we're going to pull that out in cash. And so when that hit, we were willing to write out our investments. That's fine, but we had that on hand, the thing that we needed for the next 3 years afterward, Can you talk about that, kind of the short term versus the long term and those kinds of issues?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And, really as an advisor working with our clients, those are conversations we're having all the time. What do you see yourself needing over the short term? If you need money over the course of the next 3 to 5 years, should that money even be in the market? Probably not. And so that's a conversation you have whether there's talk of a recession coming or not. And so we actually have had a lot of those conversations over the past year, and we're thankful that we did. Not only people needing cash, but just people approaching retirement. And so we're gradually going more conservative in their investments as we approach that magical date in the future. So yes, that's always definitely wise, is to be thinking about what are my short-term needs and really moving that to a safer, whether that's in cash or just something a lot less risky than the stock market. That said, on a bigger scale, you could find people proclaiming recession from the minute the market recovered in 2009 and 10 up until last year. There's always someone shouting that. And so to make a preemptive move based on a prediction is typically detrimental because, again, do some people get it right? Yes. But more people get it wrong than get it right. And so, again, I think as it relates to short-term issues, definitely you guys did the right thing. But in general, when I hear people yelling, the sky is falling, let me go to cash, you can just look back over history and see that people that have tried to act preemptively typically end up shooting themselves in the foot because they go to cash and then the market keeps going up if it doesn't go down. And then they're like, oh, I don't know when to get back in. So now I have to wait for a recession. And then in a recession, they don't feel confident enough to get back in. And so you're sitting in silence. I literally talked to someone recently who'd been sitting in cash for 10 years because they kept waiting for something to happen that never did. So you just have to be careful.
Yeah. And a follow-on question, do you think, God forbid, we have, another pandemic, which unfortunately, scientists and others are, saying actually this is part of our life now. Do you think people are going to be quicker to pull the trigger in terms of, like panicking, about their investments and wanting to get out and that sort of thing at the first sign? Like, okay, now in India, we have the first case. Now it's time to pull everything out. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, it's tough because, markets are incredibly efficient and information travels, as we all know, incredibly fast. And so it takes the market a nanosecond to price in that information. And a lot of times by the time we even have a chance to feel that fear, the markets have already reacted. So again, in relation to this specific pandemic, if we have a resurgence next year or whatever, let's just hope that there have been some advances made on the medical side of things, because I don't know how much people are going to accept another stay-at-home order. I don't know how many businesses are willing to shut down again. I think people are kind of over it, and they're starting to have the mentality of, I don't care what you tell me, I'm going to decide what's essential and what's not essential. Like, it's essential for me to feed my family, so I'm going back to work. I think people are being very patient right now, but I think that's probably going to run its course. But again, that's my opinion. So
yeah, all you have to do is look at the beaches in Florida this week.
Right?
Yeah, they're so over.
You're braver than I am.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Amy, thank you so much for joining us today. Here we are in this moment that truly does matter in the financial world, and I thank you for your wisdom And hopefully we can join in again another time.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
The content in this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice or an offer to buy or sell any security. The opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the participants only and do not necessarily represent the views of DHGWA. The services, securities, and financial instruments described in this podcast may not be available to or suitable for you, and not all strategies are appropriate at all times. Any investments mentioned on this podcast may lose money. DHGWA makes no guarantee that you will profit from any investment or strategy described in this podcast. Information in this podcast is believed accurate and reliable as of the time of the podcast, and it may become inaccurate or outdated with the passage of time. Past results are not an indication of future performance. You should contact your financial advisor before making any investment decision.